Hello there. Now, you probably saw the title of this video and clicked on it wondering if it was a joke. You may be wondering if it's nothing but clickbait. Well, no. It isn't clickbait, but I'll get to that in a bit. First, some context. In case you're unaware, this video is part of an ongoing retrospective on the mainline Super Mario series. I've had somewhat of a journey with this series. It's my favorite one in gaming, and something I've been into since I was very young. There's some games I love, games I hate, and everything in between. Like anything, the Mario series has its ups and downs. In my previous video, I examined a pretty prominent case of this in the series, the new Super Mario Bros. Games. If you ask me, they're a mixed bag. The DS entry from 2006 was pretty good, but somewhat dry and forgettable in the grand scheme of things. The Wii game is nostalgic as it was my first Mario game, but had some pacing problems and recycled a lot of aspects from its predecessor. New Super Mario Bros. U and its expansion were fine, but even more bland. And New Super Mario Bros. 2? The less said about that pillar of laziness, the better. During this era, the Mario series' deterioration into constantly recycling the same tropes over and over wouldn't lead to a noticeable decline in critical reception. But among the fans, there was an ever-growing sense of emptiness, for lack of a better term. These games had succeeded in an era of creativity where Mario was constantly at the forefront of innovation for the platforming genre. It was the first series to produce a real side-scrolling platformer, and the one to perfect it. It gave birth to the Collectathon, and by extension the 3D platformer, and after that, tried numerous creative ideas in the new dimension. By the time the era of 3D Mario arrived, the 2D series had pretty much already peaked. Super Mario World was essentially the topping off of the original trilogy, made up of it, the original game, and Mario 3. Both Mario 2s were, in my opinion, weird experiments that missed the mark, and the Game Boy games were more so supplemental material, so for all intents and purposes, these games were the main trilogy. Other game developers recognized that after progressing through their trilogy, they can't just keep making the third game over and over, otherwise things will get bland pretty quickly. It's because of this, many try something new. Thankfully for Nintendo, that opportunity arrived with the 3D era, which they took advantage of with some of their most creative games to date. Later on in the 2000s, however, the demand for more classic-style 2D Mario games had reached a peak, and the company seemed to unlearn the lesson about making a trilogy. Alongside this, some of their more original games faced an unprecedented amount of retroactive backlash, further reinforcing their mentality. I like to call this the New Super Mario Bros. Effect. First, a developer tops off the perfect trilogy and goes on to be far more experimental. In one way or another though, some outside factor influences them to fall into the very trap they had tried so hard to avoid. Making games that feel like carbon copies of their previous trilogy's peak, all because they start to think it's what the people want, but all they end up doing is causing the series in question to become stale. Other series have fallen victim to this same curse, but in my opinion, the Mario series is a pretty fascinating case study in this, because of how derivative its previously original side-scrolling branch became. But while fans noticed how uninspired the side-scrollers were becoming, there was still hope left for the 3D stuff. Super Mario 64 essentially laid the blueprints for the entire genre. Sunshine had its really fun flood idea, and Galaxy entered a literal new frontier by going to space and making use of the neat gravity mechanics. By this point, there was only one 3D Mario game I can see the argument of unoriginality for, and that's Galaxy 2. Admittedly, while I think it's pretty damn good and a little better than the first one, it did feel like a mission pack for the first game, following the same plot and having most of the same mechanics. I'd say it had enough of its own ideas to distinguish itself from the first one, but even I'll admit to mixing them up in the past. It was certainly a sign that things could be heading down the same road as the 2D games, but as I said, fans were optimistic that this wouldn't be the case. A little before Super Mario Galaxy 2 was released in May 2010, there was a new game system on the horizon. Nintendo announced their plans in March, and by E3 of that year, the console was unveiled. It was the 3DS, the next in the financial titan that was Nintendo's handheld division. Not only that, but it was the direct successor to the DS, the world's absolute best-selling handheld, and had a top screen capable of glasses-free 3D, hence its name 3DS. Honestly, I still love the name. Normally puns are pretty stupid, but this is a rare exception. Stereoscopic 3D is a concept Nintendo has experimented with for years. The failed Virtual Boy had it as part of its VR gimmick back in the 90s, and even the GameCube was planned to support it before the feature got scrapped. Point is, the 3DS had an exciting new gimmick, which is exactly what allowed the Wii to sell so well. All the cards were on the table for a massive success. So how did the 3DS do immediately after its launch? Not so well. It may be hard to believe, but the 3DS was actually a failure at first. In its first few months, the price and lack of compelling software led it to struggle finding an audience. Part of the problem is that the 3DS didn't launch with the mainline Mario game. All previous Nintendo handhelds launched with one, but the 3DS broke this tradition. However, that didn't mean there wasn't one coming. In 2010, Shigeru Miyamoto announced that the 3DS would have both 2D and 3D Mario games. We all know how the 2D portion of this series went on the console, but I've neglected the 3D part. It would manifest in Super Mario 3D Land, the first 3D Mario game made exclusively exclusively for a handheld. Now, I specify exclusively because, of course, there's Mario 64 DS, but that was a remake of a game originally on home consoles. 3D Land was built up from the ground for the 3DS. Miyamoto stated that the game was supposedly a mix of 64 and Galaxy, and would attempt to appeal to both fans of the 2D and 3D games, although its design would be more influenced by the 2D stuff. It was said that players apparently had depth perception problems with the previous 3D games, and as a result, they would go for a camera system meant to work more with the limitations of handhelds. This information may seem neutral for now, but I want you to keep it in mind. Just let it sit there and simmer. When Super Mario 3D Land released for the 2011 holiday season, it was met with critical acclaim, though not as high as the Galaxy Duo. The major gaming publications listed on the Wikipedia article, which yes, I did use to research this video, Wikipedia is a valid source, gave an average score of 9 out of 10, which is pretty typical for the series. These days, however, it seems like the game has a somewhat more mixed reputation among the fan base. In my experience, most seem to be ambivalent or moderately positive towards the game, but it does have its fair share of passionate fans, and on the other end of the spectrum, passionate haters. Those who heavily praise this game seem to fall into the 2D purist category, claiming that its more faithful adaptation of the 2D formula is what 3D Mario was apparently supposed to be, and that moving into a more open gameplay in the past was a betrayal or a mistake or whatever. Now, I'm not saying everybody in this category is that extreme, but that mindset does exist. On the other hand, some claim that the new direction was a mistake, and say it represents Nintendo's laziness, unwillingness to experiment, and over-reliance on nostalgia and familiarity. So, with all that said, what's my 2 cents? What side do I more align with, positive or negative? Well, you read the video's title before clicking on it, so I think you already know the answer to that question. I came into this game hoping things would change, but unfortunately, they haven't. Yeah, full disclosure, I don't think this game is very good. In fact, and I don't mean to spoil anything, this earns my pick for the single worst 3D Mario game ever made. It not only misses the mark as a game on its own for me, but it also represents everything I hate about this era of the series. I love Mario, but as they say, every rose has its thorns, and 3D Land is one of the sharpest and most painful of those. I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to say that no one's allowed to like it. If you love 3D Land, then holy shit man, more power to you. By all means, keep on loving it. But I have to be honest, I kinda hate this game. Even as far back as when I was a kid, I distinctly remember me and my brother struggling and raging at this game, but I always couldn't recall the reason why. Around the time we got our 3DSs, I was at that awkward age where I wouldn't unconditionally enjoy every last game I played, but I had trouble articulating the reason why. With all that said, my most significant altercation with this game occurred in early 2019. That was a little over a year after I had gotten back into this series and remembered why I loved it so much. Going in, I gave it the benefit of the doubt, because this was my favorite series after all. The longer the game went on though, the more I realized I didn't like what I was playing, and by the end I declared it one of my least favorite games in the series alongside Lost Levels. That's the opinion I had on this game for years. Entering this marathon, I had a preconceived idea that this video would be an absolute blowout, but as always, things can change. I was open to seeing this game in a new light, but like I said, my opinions really haven't changed. In fact, I think it's even worse than I remember. I may very well be signing my own death certificate and making this video. I acknowledge that I might get a lot of hate for this, and make tons of enemies, but I don't make reviews to conform to or reaffirm to any particular viewpoint. I make them to share my own, and honestly, I can't stand this game, so strap in, because this one's gonna be a doozy. To kick this off, I'll list some positives in the interest of fairness. For an early release 3D game on a handheld, this game doesn't look half bad, at least on a technical level. The art style is super bland, albeit not quite New Super Mario Bros. Levels, though getting there, but the actual graphics are pretty decent technically. The game has a decent color palette, the models are fine, the environments are passable in detail. Really, it's all you can expect for a handheld 3D Mario game. I just really wish they could have thought of some original level concepts. Again, we have the standard grass plains, desert, all that stuff. The only stages I can distinctly remember aesthetically are those set high in the sky and this one clock level. Both of these themes have been used in previous games, but 3D Land's incarnations are kinda neat. I especially like the background with these wind turbines. I've always thought those were cool looking, so I'm down for them being included like this. Super Mario 3D Land's soundtrack is also one of its strongest suits. With the exception of the tropical overworld theme, which is an affront to God, the compositions are fairly solid and enjoyable to listen to while playing. I especially like the standard stage theme, which is the single best thing in this entire game. Here, let me show you what I mean. If there's anything I would recommend with this game, I'd say look up a video of the soundtrack and listen to it. It's very much in line with the rest of the series in terms of composition and memorability. Not much more to say here. Additionally, some of the concepts in the game are fine, or would be in other circumstances. I don't personally have any objections to a somewhat more linear 3D Mario game in concept, evidenced to me by my enjoyment of the Galaxy games. That said, despite their more straightforward design, the Galaxy games still very much carried over the appeal of the previous 3D Mario games. Certain stages were more open, and even the linear levels had much more structural variety and creativity. They were never what I would describe as straight lines and always had things going on in them. Personally, this is all I want from more linear 3D platformers. My favorite examples of this specific sort of game follow this exact template or are at least pretty close to it. Open-ended levels intermixed with stages that, despite being relatively straightforward, have varied or otherwise creative structures. Some of 3D Land stages follow up on this, and on paper, the ones that do are alright. What else? Oh yeah, the power-ups. They're overall pretty good. All the staples are there, alongside the raccoon leaf from Mario 3 and a new boomerang flower. That last one seems to be somewhat based on the hammer suit from Mario 3, but retooled to work better in a 3D space. These things come in handy throughout the game. Anything else? There's an item reserve on the touchscreen. Yeah. And, that's it. That's everything even vaguely positive I have to say about this game. Similarly to Ratchet & Clank's size matters of all things, Super Mario 3D Land does one of two things for me at any given moment. It's either so frustrating I want to punch a damn hole in my wall, or boring enough to make my eyes start glazing over. Again, I want to make something clear. I don't have any ill will towards you if you like this game. I'm gonna be honest about it in this video, which means that this will be one of my most negative reviews to date. Don't let that discourage you from liking 3D Land, and don't let anyone else decide your opinions for you. If you think your perspective isn't represented properly, then by all means, make your own video sharing it. That said, this is my video, and I want to share why I think this game is a piece of shit, why this game misses the mark for me. Immediately upon starting the game, we're faced with one of my foundational complaints with the entire thing, the controls. Describing controls is a very difficult task in these videos, because it's a topic based on feel and can be tricky to articulate without the viewer having played the game themselves to know what I mean. So, I'll be blunt when I say that this really is a game you have to play for yourself to experience just how bad it feels to control. It runs into the Crash Bandicoot dilemma, where Mario's turning is far too stiff when in the air, and the lack of true analog control causes his movement to be overly sensitive and slippery on the ground. These two things clash in the absolute worst way possible, making it so controlling Mario is as awkward and unwieldy as possible. I have played games that handle a lot worse, but in the Mario series, this is without question the worst control. Or at the very least, the worst controls in a 3D Mario game. This alone prevents me from enjoying anything this game has. This series, especially its 3D division, prides itself on smooth controls that make the simple act of running around aimlessly fun in itself. I can't even begin to tell you how many hours I've wasted on Mario 64 alone, just because it feels so good to move him around. Super Mario 3D Land does not have this, and that's a huge problem. Okay, I know what many of you are probably thinking. It's unfair for me to criticize the controls in this game so harshly and compare them to the console games because it's on a handheld. I can see the argument there, but my point isn't this game doesn't control exactly like the console games, therefore it's bad. What I'm trying to say is that the physics themselves are terrible, which makes playing this game feel like fighting against it rather than working with its systems, and that's just not fun for me. Additionally, it's not like the 3DS was incapable of providing a decent control scheme. As opposed to the DS, which just had a D-pad for movement, the 3DS has a circle pad capable of analog movement. Also, I forgot to mention, but this game has a run button. A fucking run button in a 3D platformer on a console capable of analog movement. At least Super Mario 64 DS, for as poor as it controlled, was on a console that didn't support analog movement. What exactly is this game's excuse? The controls will be too complicated for 3% of the audience? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't exactly remember there being some huge outcry about 3D Mario games being too hard for kids to understand because of their controls. Yeah, I get it. Kids are pretty fucking stupid, but did Nintendo really think they were so incompetent they couldn't figure out that pushing the circle thingy forward makes the little red man run faster? No, apparently they thought truncating the controls was a better idea. As such, I argue that it wasn't technical limitations that caused this, but rather simple poor control programming. Super Mario 64 DS is a dated product of its time, while this game is merely the result of bad decisions. Look, I wouldn't hate the fact that the game uses the run button nearly as much as the physics were actually designed around this, but they just aren't. If you aren't running, then your jumps have absolutely no reach or momentum to speak of, which makes even the simplest of platforming a hellish trial of patience. It also doesn't help that Mario's supposed top speed is beyond sluggish, as opposed to the snappy, quick movement from the previous 3D games, and that the preset camera angles get in the way constantly. I don't have any more to say on this, I'm just shocked at how bad this game handles. Although, speaking of platforming, the level design. The level design. It's only, what, the deciding factor of a platformer's quality, since it's the basis of the whole platforming part. The level design of the 3D Mario series has been consistently pretty damn great from the very start. You got the explorative yet confined and easy to understand sandboxes of SM64, Sunshine, and parts of Galaxy, and the more traditional linear stuff from most of Galaxy, and the secret stages in Sunshine. While there's been a miss every now and then to be sure, all in all, these games are designed expertly, and they understand the unique strengths and weaknesses the third dimension has. So, being the 5th 3D Mario game, how does 3D Land follow up on this lineage? Well, I've already spoiled it's a mixed bag, but it's a mixed bag. Again, some parts of this game are fine enough on paper. If they were in the Galaxy engine, or hell, just a game of controls designed for linear obstacle courses in 3D that aren't absolute shit, I would definitely be able to enjoy them. Unfortunately, because of the horrible control, these moments end up being way more frustrating than they were intended to be. This is probably the most annoying 3D Mario game to date. For about a third of it, you're forced into these challenges that feel really unfit for the controls you're given, which as established, I think are complete shit. It's so easy to slip off platforms or simply not make a jump because of how fucked Mario's momentum is. But at least frustrating gameplay is possible to power through. At least these moments are capable of keeping my attention, even if for all the wrong reasons. The remaining 80% of the game, on the other hand, is impossible to stomach because of how damn boring it is. Most of this game can be summarized very simply. Hold forward, occasionally press jump, maybe dodge an enemy or two, wait around for slow stage obstacles to move out of your way, possibly die because of some dumb bullshit with the controls, and repeat this boring ass gameplay all over again. Have fun going through these straight hallways with nothing going on all over again, jackass. Seriously though, these levels feel like a flanderized version of the Galaxy games. I get it, it's a handheld game, but they could do better than this. This game gets so repetitive by the end to the point of being painful. On top of this, there's two interlocking problems that make this repetition even worse. These being the checkpoints and the hit detection. Checkpoints aren't present in some levels, which wouldn't be so bad if they were short like SMB3, but some of these are auto-scrollers that drag on for several minutes each. I'm sorry, but I can't feel anything but hatred towards what I'm playing when dying to a shitty boss means being forced to relive this long, drawn-out, boring stage. It absolutely kills the pacing, and any semblance of fun for that matter. Which, speaking of, the bosses lead us swimmingly into the second of these problems, the hit detection. And my dear god, is it abysmal. You know what's great to have when your game controls like dog shit? Broken collision. You know how in many games, the collision extends past the visible model, allowing you to seemingly stand on air? That's so you don't have to be so goddamn precise with your jumps. So, of course, the game that needed it most, the one where your jumping momentum is beyond fucked, and the one with the run button, seems to forget about it. If that wasn't bad enough, guess what helpful move that would have eliminated this problem is inexplicably missing? What the fuck even happened here? How does this game keep tripping up so consistently in areas even the first ever 3D Mario game had no problem with? In addition, like I said, the bosses are completely insufferable. The controls already make hitting them a Herculean task in itself, but then you find out how busted and skewed their hitboxes are. More often than not, trying to jump on these bastards either results in a miss or getting hit by them. It turns what would have been simple fights into a brutal patience test, one that I have absolutely zero patience for. Bowser also deserves a special mention, as his hitboxes seem the most broken of all. Maybe I'm just missing something, but a lot of the time when I get hit, it really feels like I shouldn't. Possibly because these attacks happen too damn fast to react to with the atrocious controls. These two huge flaws just about smash the already crappy gameplay into a million pieces. They contribute to an overarching sense of incompetence or rushed production, something that I don't get for most of the other Mario games, even the ones we know for sure were rushed. These problems interlock and overlap, making this already boring game completely unbearable. All of these things contribute to what is easily this game's defining flaw, the thing that pushes it over the edge and lowers it beyond redemption for me: the pacing. I haven't been very subtle about this one, but yeah, this game's pace is an absolute mess, and never once is it satisfying. All the problems I've mentioned, the sluggish and clunky movement, the slow levels, the lack of checkpoints, and constant BS deaths brought on by the awful collision that force you to replay the same plotting stages over and over, they all reinforce one another and make playing this game a tedious chore. But that isn't it. There's another particular system that only further worsens the awful pacing of this game, and that's the star coins. I've built up to this over several videos, but here we go. I fucking hate the star coin system in this game. Hate it. It's the definition of padding, forcing you to go out of your way to get a collectible that was once optional in previous games. I will concede that this is one of those things that gets less offensive on repeat playthroughs, but therein lies the issue. If you're an unsuspecting newcomer, you can play through this game assuming these things are optional, until out of nowhere you're roadblocked in the third world. By this point, you probably had no idea you had to collect these things, so guess what? You'll have to backtrack and replay these boring levels all over again, making sure to pay extra attention to pick up these stupid collectibles that you weren't previously conditioned to know to collect. Oh, didn't know about them? Well, fuck you. You should've. Now have fun reliving these boring-ass auto-scrollers all over again. This was the experience I had on my playthrough several years ago. I was minding my own business, then reached the World 3 castle and suddenly had to replay every level before it to nab enough star coins to continue. What ingenuity. Now, I want to address some counter arguments about this because I guarantee someone will raise them if I don't. First off, no, this is not even close to being the same thing as the collectibles from the previous 3D games. That argument stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of how they worked. In those games, the collectibles were what everything revolved around. They were essentially the flagpole of those games, marking progress through the game. Even in the more linear Galaxy games, this was the case, because they had multiple stars per level and weren't structured around the traditional course clear model. The star coins in 3D Land are, by contrast, what would have been the optional collectible. Something like the Chaos Emeralds from the old Sonic games, or the bonus rooms and hero coins in DKC, where the collectibles were optional content included for explorative players. Here in 3D Land, 3D Land, they pulled a Sonic Unleashed or SpongeBob movie game and make you go after these things that any logical human being would assume are optional. This is a stage-to-stage action platformer, not a collectathon, and having to do this shit is a huge pace breaker. Second off, the claim that this game actually does condition you for the sudden progression block with these optional stages you can unblock with star coins. I can see how someone would make this argument, but I have one pretty simple rebuttal, that being New Super Mario Bros. On the DS. That game also had star coins and they could be used to unlock optional stages. And guess what? That game didn't have a single required star coin gate. Okay, let's put ourselves in the shoes of someone who played that game and then is jumping into this one. For all they know, it's the same system as that game, and those levels are just a bonus content put in there for those who want a little extra bang for their buck. So how are they supposed to predict that the game would force them to collect the coins? It's completely unreasonable to assume that any given person can infer that the star coins are required with these circumstances. So the fact they don't tell you have to collect them until so far in is inexcusable, in my opinion. Finally, and this is a more personal one, some may claim that I'm a hypocrite for praising games like, completely random example, Sonic Adventure 2, even though some of their gameplay elements are somewhat beginner unfriendly. They'll say, well, that game is just as bad in this regard, so you're hypocritical for liking it. To that I say, no, that's a complete false equivalency. Now, there's a nerdy, pretentious philosophy term for you, but I think it's an accurate description. Using SA2 as an example, its systems are designed for replayability. I, for one, find it a ton of fun to go back to that particular game over and over, honing my skills with each playthrough. It's a game that, like the grand majority of the other Sonic games, is crafted around skill mastery through patience, incentivizing repeat playthroughs. It also helps that the first playthrough is actually fun for me, so I actually felt inclined to play it again, which 3D Land kind of isn't. Moving on. 3D Land star coins, by contrast, are something placed in there just to pad out the game. As soon as you know about it, it becomes way less of a problem, but that only makes it more annoying that it's there in the first place. It's a blindside meant to catch newcomers off guard and nothing else. Say what you will about SA2 or any game that falls into this category for that matter, but at the very least, it never makes you go back and replay the same exact levels over and over again just to progress in the main campaign. If it did, then maybe I would have an easier time understanding all the utterly undeserved vitriol that it's subjected to on a daily basis, but this is a video about Mario 3D Land, so I'll shut my mouth. Point is, the star coins don't add replayability or encourage coming back to the game. They're a tedious progression gate that causes it to drag, which has the exact opposite effect of making me want to stay away from this crappy game. The longer this game goes on for, the more tedious it becomes. It's a constant cycle of boring levels, tedious forced star coin collecting, and frustrating collision and controls. All of this is so insufferable that I generally considered throwing in the towel on my initial run a few years back, and even on this playthrough. But I saw it through to the end, and my god is this one of the worst finales in the whole series. Before the final world, you have the worst level in the whole damn game, the World 7 airship. Fuck this level, fuck this level, fuck this level. It's the most boring auto-scroller yet, and forces you to fight two bosses at once at the end. Because that's how you make a great boss fight. Two bosses that are near impossible to hit just because of the horrendous control and collision. I managed to win by the skin of my teeth, but before that came an agonizing gauntlet of having to replay this trash over and over. By the end, I just wanted out. World 8 doesn't even warrant me going into detail because it's the same shit as the rest of the game. That is, until the end, which is one of the most frustrating finales to any game I've ever played. So you reach what seems to be the final stage, Bowser's Castle. You fight your way through it, and at the end you face off with him. Seems like this game is finally coming to an end, and Peach is finally in sight. It turns out, though, she's just a prop. Yeah, this game does a fake-out ending. In almost any other game, this would have been charming, but here, this game is already a slog that I want to end, so the fact they put this here, it's like they're mocking the player, saying, "You thought it was over, huh, dumbass? Well, no. Have fun playing more of this tedious train wreck." You fuckwit. After this, you have another level, which is also boring as fuck, and then the real final castle, which costs a whopping 100 star coins to access. On my first playthrough, I had to grind even more. I just wanted out, but there I was, stuck in the purgatory of this miserable video game experience. Once you mercifully get into this castle, you can finally face the final boss, which goes on far too long. And guess what? They do it again. They make it seem like Bowser was defeated at one point, but then he suddenly reappears for the one last phase. Like, Jesus Christ, can this game just fuck off already? After bashing my head against the brick wall of tedium that is this game for a total of 4 hours, I finally reached the final switch and finished off Bowser. Good fucking riddance. I then watched as Peach was rescued once again, but all I felt was an immense emptiness because I had just played this soulless husk of a game. Oh yeah, that reminds me, I forgot to mention the story. It's utterly forgettable. Guess what it is? Some shit happens, Bowser comes and takes the princess, Mario then chases him down and rescues her. What else do you expect by this point? This era of the Mario series was just so stubbornly lazy. I don't even know why I'm talking about this right now. Important thing is, this fucking game is finally over. This game is a fucking disgrace. I get it, that's probably an unpopular opinion, but it's my opinion. Through all the bitching I just did, I think it made it clear just how little value I think this game has as a product. It has some optional content with a more challenging world, but given how bad I find the base campaign to be, I'm not touching that shit with a mile-long HIV-covered pole. There's also the 100% completion campaign, which makes you hit the top of the flagpole as both Mario and Luigi. 2 words. Fuck that. I hated this game playing it normal, so the only way I would even attempt any of this is if I decided I hate myself enough one day. This game is an insufferable piece of shit. I found the controls clunky and awful, the level design boring and drawn out, the progression abysmally padded, the pacing beyond plotting and broken, the collision barely functional, and the bosses painfully frustrating. This game has no soul, and it feels like it was churned out as fast as possible to earn a cheap paycheck. Remember how I mentioned the developers said it would apparently be a mix of SM64 and Galaxy? Yeah, that's a good fucking joke. This game has nothing in common with SM64, and as for Galaxy, while it's clearly aping off those games, it feels like a watered down version of them with frustrating controls, awful skewed collision, and generally poor design. My ass this was designed to appeal to 2D and 3D Mario games. In its apparent quest to combine those two and appeal to everyone, it ends up feeling like a blatantly unfinished and diluted corporate product, which is downright infuriating coming from an otherwise great series. This game is that silhouette I've included in my disliked Mario games list all this time, and is without a doubt one of the most disappointing games for me. Fuck this game, it's an unmitigated disaster. Not to the degree of something like Secret Agent Clank, but absolutely unenjoyable and painful to play through all the same, and that makes it a failure either way to me. I hope to never play this garbage again for the rest of my life. And there you have it, my take on 3D Land. I don't know how well this one was gonna go over as I write it, but everything I said in this video is my true, honest opinion on this game. I just don't think it's good, and it's one of the few Mario games I don't like. Thankfully, at least for the next few videos, things won't get anywhere near as negative as they did here. I just had a bone to pick with this particular entry is all. Next in line is a game that may seem odd to have any sort of positivity towards, considering how it's so heavily based on this one that I just trashed for about half an hour, but spoiler alert, I do have more positive things to say about it. Then again, I haven't played the game in over a year, so maybe that could change. In any event, in the next video I'll be taking a look at Super Mario 3D World, originally released on Wii U and later re-released on Switch. Thanks for sitting through my ranting, I hope I provided a strong outlet for those who can relate, and I will see you in the next one.
Fake vs Reality. Super Mario 3D Land. Fake. Real.